Pete Greider, I think, would like to join. Have regular invitations. Do you have his contact info?
Yeah. I've added him to the. Let me see if he's on there. He said he was on vacation last week. He sent me.
Okay.
So, but if you want to, if he's right now saying, hey, I'd like to join, just send him the link and he can pop up here. I'd love to have Pete involved. So anyway, proper hello to anybody who's watching this recording or happening by this meeting. Chris Neidl here. Oh, here's Sebastian. Very good. This is our kind of weekly, very casual workshopping where we're going to do this every Thursday. We have for the last few Thursdays for people that are interested in or are already participating in the Four Corners Carbon Removal Purchasing Challenge for communities. I'm going to go ahead and drop the link in the comments to that initiative if it's your first time hearing about it. But this is what we're doing from here on out, really, certainly by the end of the year, but we'll continue it going where we're trying to activate interest at the city, county, even neighborhood level in carbon removal through a purchasing activity. And this means whether it's a city or a county officials or individuals or institutions within a particular place or some combination of both, that will go through an exercise of committing to purchase. We're saying $5,000, just as sort of we think an achievable number per place, but that can vary by place, to purchase carbon removals from a group, one of a group of vetted companies that were last year actually selected by the US DOE for a similar national program. So they've been very vetted by national labs. And we kind of just got started in June on this, but during this summer, some of our real hardcores who you're looking at the screen, trying to see if we can kind of create some early successes of getting interest from cities or counties to participate. And then as we get into the fall and then through the year, have a more fulsome campaign with hopefully a lot more places participating. So who I have here on the screen with me are some just real hardcore standbys I've been working with for years on carbon removal. We got Carl and Harold. They're both in the Bay Area. And then we have Sebastian in Southern California. I am a New Yorker who's currently in Costa Rica, where I used to live, and hoping my internet doesn't cause me problems. That's sometimes an issue where I am. I'll let the guys tell me. I'm going to have to turn off my camera occasionally. But we had a really good conversation last week because Carl and Harold were readying themselves for some presentations that they were going to give to build interest in their respective places or networks. And then Sebastian down in Ventura County has an interesting event today where there's an opportunity in a very condensed format to talk about carbon removal in this challenge. So we're going to kind of talk through the progress of Carl and Harold, where they sort of are, and then kind of talk with Sebastian about what his needs are, and maybe give him some sort of feedback on how to make the most of 90 seconds on a stage. How's that sound, everybody?
That's good.
That sounds good.
All right, very good. So let's start from where we were last week. Carl and Harold, you kind of talked a little bit about where you guys were. Don't know if there's anything to kind of report back, starting with sort of a brief summary about what it is that you were doing. Harold, yours might be today, if I'm not mistaken, right? The Finger Lakes one?
No, mine was last.
Okay.
Well, it was Monday. So
Monday,
this was
right.
the Central New York Environment and Sustainability. It's an SRAG, Environment Sustainable Rotary Action Group, ESRAG. Anyway, sustainability people who are acting within the Rotary groups to move things forward. So I was in front of one of their task forces. So a dozen folks, seemed like about a dozen folks. And I presented the challenge, a little bit of background on why to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, because there was some question about that.
Yep.
From some of the people. So we started way back at the beginning a little bit, but the outcome was great. Bob Wright, who you may know, I know Carl will be familiar with Bob Wright because he's been part of our greenhouse gas removal action team.
From Eugene, from Oregon?
Yes.
Oh, great. Yeah, I'm glad he was there.
Bob was on this call. Bob afterwards said, Harold, I want to take charge of this for Oregon. And so that was a good outcome.
very good outcome. He's a great
Simultaneously,
guy.
I had reached out to Mike Robinson, who you're probably also familiar with at Pack Clean. Well, it
Very familiar with him.
turns out that Bob is on the Pack Clean team, leadership team, along with Jason Grillo from Air Miners. And I've talked to all of their leadership team except one guy, and they're all thinking this is the challenge would be great for them. So looks like between Bob and their team and the challenge, we've got some kind of a marriage brewing.
Yeah, I got to catch up with. I know Bob and Jason and Mike very well. I've worked with them very consistently over the years. So yeah, would love to kind of circle back with them because they could be real agents for impact up in the Pacific Northwest. Prime territory to do this kind of a thing. Great conditions in general. But where you spoke, Carol, and I'd love to hear a little more detail about the kind of feedback you got and if there was some sort of clear next steps or questions that they need answers to. But where you were speaking to from across the country is kind of one of the sort of the focal points of climate action in New York State, because it's right around Cornell and Ithaca. And Ithaca is one of the most climate forward places in the Northeast. And Cornell also, as I mentioned last time, has just a dense cluster of expertise around various different areas of carbon dioxide removal. So with your initial sort of opening up the door, as I mentioned to you, I think on WhatsApp, we could, if there's a further issue, we could bring in some of those people at Cornell College of Agriculture and Life Sciences or at the Atkinson Center to kind of put a stamp of sort of legitimacy on it, but to also provide some more information from a science perspective if people feel like they need that. So you can let me know, but I just wanted to kind of, as an upstate New York native, that's what Ithaca is really, really known for, that for good reason. So, but you might also get, Harold, in that area, some of the same resistance that we get from committed environmentalists around carbon removal that we're all familiar with, that we don't need to belabor here, where there's sometimes a level of mistrust about carbon removal. Though I think that's kind of starting to melt down a little bit, I think, as time progresses. But anyway, let me shut up and let me know if there's any other kind of things you want to share that were notable from that meeting.
I did hear from one of the Rotarians that when I had finished describing in some detail the suppliers and how the challenge would work, one of the things that came up is, well, we want to do actual on the ground projects locally. And the idea of just giving money to purchase CDR that would happen somewhere else, they didn't give them the kind of the hands-on, tactile sort of sense of getting something done that they would be looking for. But others in the group pushed back against that and said, oh, no, we do that. We give money to this group, internet, So anyway, that sort of thing came up. I like the idea of getting some outside validators to talk to the same group in Ithaca. I did highlight for them that Four Corners had just finished this biochar application grant cycle, so they could see that Four Corners was doing good things in their backyard. In Central New York, Hudson Valley, that's them. That's part of their region.
Yeah.
So I like the idea of putting some people together, bringing them in front, maybe for a 20-minute kind of thing to validate carbon removal.
Yeah, I love
we'll
that.
have to talk about it, but I like that idea. I think they would welcome it. People there are very much interested in the information itself, and I heard from the leader of the presentation that the information was well appreciated.
I'm sure with you presenting, I think you really project knowledge and sincerity. So, I was very happy that you were going to be doing that because I think you do it well. One other thing too, won't go down a rabbit hole on this, but just to put a pin in it, we can talk about it later, is there is going to be a pretty significant piece of carbon and agriculture legislation that's going to be introduced in New York State that I wrote, that Cornell is also involved in. And the kinds of activism that you see in that area, there's just really a lot of people in Ithaca that it's very subject related. So when the time is right, we can also share information with that group about that, because I think there'll be a lot of interest.
Maybe sort of combine the two, because you have local, statewide legislation that they would be very interested in. And if it's validated, the whole carbon dioxide removal thing is validated at the same time as the legislation. You can do a twofer kind of thing.
Twofer, exactly. Carl, you raised your finger for a second. I didn't know if you had any just thoughts on anything that Harold just said?
Oh, no, I was just excited to hear some of the specific details and the way you handled it. I think that's great. And part of my reaction was due to the fact that you mentioned that one of the attendees or people there said that they would like to see local, removal activities or, projects or what, I forget the words, but I got some of that last night as well when I got to present to the Los Altos Environmental Commission. I don't want to switch gears if you've got more, Harold, but
one thing that's relevant to you, Carl, and then we'll come right back. I referred someone to you from your district, from Los Altos, and I don't know if she reached out to you, but Tammy Mulcahy.
Oh. It
She's
rings
like
a bell, but no, I haven't heard from her yet.
Okay.
But I look forward to it.
Very active woman, very articulate, and I'm hoping to see her again on the next meetings of this Central New York SRAG group.
I love it. Thanks for
she
making
wanted
that
to. she wanted to reach out to you, and I'm pretty sure I don't know if I gave her the actual email because I was a little flustered with some of the things going on all at once. But anyway, keep your eyes open
Harold,
for Tammy.
So you just mentioned the next group. So would this be agended for that? People to kind of share what they've sort of metabolized, and if there's further interest, is that kind of the next step? Is the next meeting or?
Well, I think the task force that I was at is a monthly meeting, but they have a wider thing every week. So I'm going to be poking my nose into those every week and try and assess what to move forward with.
Okay. So do let me know if it is next month and you feel like there's some momentum or something, because that does give me adequate time to probably pull in, some of the people at Cornell, to potentially sort of be there. So just keep me posted on that. And I could probably, that's right before Climate Week. But right now, as I've told you guys, I'm in an insane moment with COP right now, but things will be a bit easier then. So I'll be back in New York State. So if it's even helpful for me to be involved in that, scheduled permitting, I might be able to make an appearance if that's helpful. But you let me know. I don't want to get in the way of something that you got to handle.
Will do. Fun fact, I lived in Ithaca for a couple of years during graduate school, so I'm really familiar with its feel, and it's a great campus.
It's unique. It's really distinct in New York, at least. It's just this sort of island of it's just a kind of a different kind of place. Very beautiful as well. Cool. So Carl, so you're right off the stage basically. This was last night, is that right? Or
That's right. Yeah. So last evening, 6 p.m. here in Los Altos is the regular monthly meeting of the Environmental Commission, which there are many commissions, and basically they exist to advise the city council. So it made sense to start with them, and if I could convince them of the idea of, hey, let's allocate $5,000 and remove some carbon, and then go from there. So yeah, in fact, why don't I share my screen if that works?
Yep, go for it. I'll pop it up as soon as I see it.
Share screen. Share screen tips. Okay. And then entire screen 2. Sorry. All right. So then I want to switch to.
Hey, Chris, while Carl is doing that, is the legislation in New York actually in committee or something at this point?
No, it's going to get, again, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but it'll get introduced, hopefully in September. And then, both, ideally with, we have one sponsor in one house, but, hopefully a second one. And it's focused on, it's called the Empire State Carbon Farming Act. So it is very much focused on the forms of carbon removal that can be integrated with farming. And it's a incentive for farmers to adopt those. And the incentive is scaled to the durability of the carbon removal. And then there's also an incentive for what we call carbon farming entrepreneurs, which itself can include farmers. So these are the companies that are investing in pyrolyzers or other equipment that's related. and that's an investment tax credit that would, help make those types of investments. So it's both on the supply side and the demand side. Very exciting bill. I love it. It was one of the funnest ones I ever wrote because I think there's some novel elements to it. Carl knows a lot of, I've been talking about it for a while, but so hopefully that'll get announced at Climate Week on a stage. Knock on wood, but moving in that direction. So.
Speaking of the carbon removal project that Four Corners did there with the biochar and Cornell Extension doing testing, any idea when their testing results, that's a question that came up. Any idea when testing results might be available?
It takes a while to see something,
Yeah.
on that. So we'll do, they just put it in the ground,
Right.
just this beginning of the growing season. So just 6 weeks ago. And then we did the testing before for the baseline. And then we will do a testing next year at the same time when a full grow cycle is done. And then we will do another one at year 2. And that gives us kind of a thing. So it's not like an instantaneous thing. It's just the nature of the thing. But, we will certainly share what we find out. There's been other tests, though, done by the extension at other places previously. So, if the people are really feasting for some evidence of that, I could, talk to my colleagues and see if there's anything, that we can, Spruce Haven Farm in the Hudson Valley is, they've been doing biochar for a bit, because Cornell is there. There's actually been more stuff that's been happening right there in the region. So we can follow up on that, but I can find out what kind of live data that's a bit older is there. But I see, Carl, is that the correct slide there, Carl? I think it's the Environmental Commission.
Yes. So this is the City of Los Altos webpage for the Environmental Commission. I'm just showing this, for anybody who's watching live or the recording, some of the kind of background work one might do preparing for a meeting. And so in particular, I took a look at the list of the commissioners. Normally there would be 7. There's 1 vacancy. And so there are 6 commissioners currently. And I had met a couple of them, but most I didn't know anything about. In particular, the chair, I'd never heard of her. So I thought, I wonder who she is.
I think you mentioned this last week. I think this is a person who's an actual scientist, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, popped on here. And, of course, her cover art is the periodic table. So that's a clue. She has her PhD in chemical engineering. And then as I was scrolling down, it's like, did you want to see all 71 of her patents?
Okay. Yeah, you shared this last week, actually. This is a good audience member. Yeah, for sure.
Good audience member. So, and then these are the slides that I'd put together, which I also shared a bit last week. And they worked well. I will say, just as a note for anyone planning to do something like this, that once they received a link to the Google Slides from me, they went ahead and created a PDF of the slides, which is great. So it could be included, along with the other things in the agenda. But Harold, the wonderful build that you and Pete put so much time into, that didn't really show up properly. So I guess the bottom line here is, if you're sending something in that's going to be turned into a PDF, think that through. Maybe, like, for example, this was in the PDF, this sort of awkward overlay of text. So just a note that think it through. I didn't.
Good flag.
Yeah. And then my wife, Paula, joined the meeting. And so she snapped a few pictures. You can see I was.
Ooh, share that with me, Carl. Can you share that with me, Carl?
Of course.
Okay,
of course. Cool. And they liked my shirt. And I mentioned that I'd been wearing it when I had an informal meeting with the mayor during his office hours. And so I just, had about 15 or 20 minutes. And when we got to the policy slide, they seemed, well, first of all, there was a high level of interest. All 6 commissioners were clearly paying attention, and towards the end asked a lot of great questions. And I don't know if you could possibly read it here, but the policy at the state level, I mentioned, then I said locally, we have, Menlo Park, a nearby city, also engaged, including having a city staff member already participating. And that seemed to resonate. And this gives you a sense of the size of the room here. We had 4 commissioners in the room. These other people are not commissioners. And then there were 2 people attending remotely via Zoom, and including the chair, the one with the PhD in chemical engineering. So all of this was being recorded, including the scene in the room. So I have asked for a copy of the recording, and hopefully I will be able to get that soon as well. So just wanted to give you a little sense of how that went. I will say that the questions were great, and there was a lot of interest. And I have to say my favorite question was when I forgot which commissioner it was, somebody asked me, so is this your job, or what is your, is this just a hobby? And I said, a hobby. It feels like more than a hobby, but sure, let's go with that. But I just clarified. I said, to be clear, Open Air Collective is not a 501c3. I'm just a volunteer. We're all volunteers. So they clearly were interested in understanding, what is my place in all this. Another great question asked by the chair was, well, roughly how many tons of CO2, or how much CO2 would be sequestered by if we, not that I'm saying we could do this, but let's say we found 10 acres here in the city and did a proper reforestation. How much CO2 would that sequester? And I did not know off the top of my head, but through the Citizens Climate Lobby training, I've learned it's always great when they ask you a question that you don't know the answer to, because you have a reason to follow up. And so I've already followed up, and the answer is roughly 10 tons per year, maybe 20, depending on the forest. That wasn't
were they asking that question, Carl? Did you get a sense? It's obviously tree planting isn't kind of within the set of solutions we're talking about. Were they kind of looking at it for a comparison because they're more familiar with tree planting, and they wanted to see how much does that do versus what you're talking about? Was that kind of what they were doing?
I think it was partly that, and also partly what Harold touched on earlier, which is this tendency to go to, well, what can we do here, right, in our little area, right, physically here, and in part because of my interpreting the question that way, I clarified that the Purchasing Challenge website, is totally set up to connect you without having to create a project for reforestation. No, you can a few mouse clicks and you picked your provider and that sort of thing. So actually that question was helpful in that regard. And there are things that have been done in Los Altos that involve projects that occur outside the city, so that, again, kind of similar to what Harold found, it wasn't too hard to connect those dots. But yeah, the questions were good. Somebody asked if any of the methods that I had mentioned required more research, or are they all kind of ready to go? And I said, well, the ones that are fully vetted on the website, they're all ready to go. But in the broader spectrum of possibilities, yes, there are things that probably do need more research. I mentioned ocean iron fertilization as an example of that. One of the commissioners asked, so how many cities are already doing this? So then I reminded them that the program had just launched, a few weeks ago, really. And I said, but there is one example in Boulder County in Colorado, and you'll see on the website, they're in for the full 5,000. So those are the types of that came up.
I'll mention a couple things quickly on that, or ask a question as well. As I think a good answer to that last question is it's not a giant group of cities out there that already have what like a Menlo Park or Los Altos do, where they acknowledge carbon removal as a need. So to start with those places that we think might be most game because they're furthest along, and at least comprehending that is important. And I also wonder around the local part, there's different ways of doing it. Like, well, what can we do here locally? Were you able to mention that the area that you and Harold live in is kind of like maybe like the most dense cluster of carbon removal startups and significant research, with national labs and universities in the country, if not the world? There's a kind of another kind of local angle about the sector being built in Northern California.
Yeah, I did have a list of California companies, mostly Bay Area, in the slides, and heirloom carbon was the first one on the list.
Mhm.
And I said, full disclosure, our daughter actually works there. So but maybe that prompted the question about, so is this like your, professional
It's a
lobbyist?
family gig.
Yeah, right. But no, that's a good point, Chris, to note that not every city is that far along. I did say that many cities in America have in their climate action plans something about net zero by a certain date. But to your point, Chris, I think very few of them go so far as to say, and therefore we're going to need to sequester carbon, and here are some ideas about how to do that. I mean, yeah, so that's a good tip for
Chris.
Yeah.
You said, I think you're totally right, that we should try and figure out which cities do mention carbon removal in their climate action plan. And is there a list by any chance?
There's a long list from 2023 that was in. If you go to the Four Corners website and resources, we have those two that Carbon Direct in Boulder County, which I helped in the editing of, and Carbon Direct went out and did research, and they found something like 130 cities that at least directly or indirectly sort of reference it. And it's obviously quite labor intensive to go and look specifically about, does that mean they're just talking about tree planting, or does that mean that they, and so what my thought was is if we kind of go do it, somebody could decide to go take a look at it and put them in a chat GPT and see if you can actually squeeze out, and sort those out. But that's from 2023, and there might even be some shifting on that. And, I don't know if they were even able to net, all of them, so, but that, if you look at that list, and in the appendix to that and in the works cited, it lists all of the plans. And Carl, you might remember I put all of those in a spreadsheet at one point, and I did actually start looking at some of them, but I just had to kind of tap out a bit because I couldn't, do the deepest dive on all of them. Carl, just as a final part on that, where did it kind of leave off with, I guess, in terms of, beyond just educating them on it, what did they think about the idea of potentially participating in the campaign in some shape or form?
I think it's fair to say the 6 commissioners in the meeting last night understood the need, understood the opportunity. But then when I just flat out said, so do we even need to go to the city council, or can you guys just decide to cut a check for $5,000? Knowing full well that the answer was no, but it did elicit a couple of laughs. So that was a good thing. But my specific request of them was to recommend to the city council that the city council place this topic on a future agenda for a city council meeting, because a decision to spend even as little as $5,000, I'm sure they're going to feel needs to be done in a public forum, which frankly, I think is a good thing, because then, more awareness raising and members of the public could hear about it. So that's the request, is to recommend to the city council that they put this on the agenda in a future meeting where, I would presumably present for probably a smaller amount of time. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on that as a request.
Just one other thing I would add to that too is I wonder if is a second lane. Again, the more I think through this and even get some of the feedback from the discussions I'm having is about could there be something that the city participates in, either as a cheerleader, a celebrator of, or as an active participant in the selection that involved, citizens or schools that were shooting towards that goal, but the city is involved in some way, and that's that is as significant. In some ways, that's might turn out to be the most impactful thing. Where it doesn't necessarily ask for the full check or even any. But there's a sort of an acknowledged we're a stakeholder in this. So maybe that would be a thing. We'll sort of check back as we get after the summer. To see if there's a timetable for when it would be proposed to the city council, but maybe there's a way of sort of kind of initiating something, getting, others involved and see if they want to participate that way. I don't know, just a thought.
No, I think that's a cool idea. And a couple thoughts. One is that we have a very active environmental group here, very local, called Greentown Los Altos. So it's specifically Los Altos. Been around for 20 years, I'd say. A lot of active volunteers. Harold, I'm guessing the woman that you're sending my way is part of that group.
Be familiar with it for sure.
Yeah, and I could easily imagine the idea of pitching to Greentown Los Altos the idea that what if we did a public-private, like what if we committed to raising half of it
Right.
through some crowdsourcing or whatever. So that's the public skin in the game kind of model that I think you may be thinking about there, Chris. Another thought is you might recall I mentioned when I dropped in on office hours for Mayor Daley, and we had an informal conversation, and he asked for an example of a particular company, and for whatever reason I thought of Crew Carbon, and he said, once I explained what they did, he says, "Oh, well, you may not know this, probably don't, but Palo Alto sewage treatment plant, which we use, right? So Los Altos doesn't have its own. We send our whatever to Palo Alto and they take care of it. And there's apparently a fairly substantial, I don't know if it's a renovation or some kind of upgrades, some work being planned. And I thought, what if we could loop Crew Carbon and present that as an opportunity for them to have a new customer?
Well, not only link Crew Carbon, but link Palo Alto, into it.
Yes. Sorry. Yes.
I was, as you were just talking, I was trying to think of, if is there anybody at Stanford that is doing research around wastewater treatment, and there might be somebody that can validate on the Stanford side, because Stanford obviously has lots of resources, both intellectually, but also, financially, so that could be an interesting sort of collabo if it gets that. So let's kind of pursue that a little bit further. But okay, great. Well, what I wanted to do, and we'll keep this live. We'll be tracking this as it goes. But phenomenal work, guys. Not surprised. Thanks for putting yourselves out there. Really, really excited about it. But let's turn to Sebastian and go down to Southern California. Let me take you off mute. There was a little sound in the back. And you got a date with Destiny tonight. Not exactly, but Sebastian, you're going to be attending, and maybe you could just introduce yourself and talk about the event that you're going to and what the opportunity is, and we can take it from there.
Yeah. So I'm an environmental engineer here in Southern California. I've been working with Chris on this initiative for the past 8 to 10 months now, and kind of spearheading this whole initiative here in Southern California, specifically in Ventura County. I live here in the city of Camarillo, and so basically just trying to reach out to all these cities here in this county, telling them about our whole climate action initiative. And so we have a potential interest from the port of Hueneme. It's one of the biggest exports in California, second to, I think, or third to Long Beach. And I believe there's one in San Francisco, I could be wrong. And so today, my city is hosting a public workshop for their climate action plan. So they published this back in 2022, and I've only had one public basically workshop, and that was last year. And so as with any government work, it's pretty slow. And so been waiting for this moment for a long time, so to say, almost a year now, for them to have a public workshop just to get input from the public. And just looking over their climate action plan, and it's basically the same thing you see everywhere. It's electrifying vehicles, it's planting more trees, and so on and so forth. And so they want to be carbon neutral by 2045. But as we know, they can only get so close to being net neutral, but they're still emitting emissions. And so today is a very exciting opportunity. I think like Chris said, I have a day with Destiny. We have this initiative, and I think that me being there would at least provide a face to the program that we're having, but also to hopefully get a partnership with the city of Camarillo. Tell them that your climate action plan is great, but it's not finished yet, and that's where we come in to fill in that empty piece or that puzzle, to help them achieve their sustainability goals. And we here in Camarillo, we've seen a lot of the effects of climate change. We had this huge fire last year.
Right.
The small city, we lost over like 100 homes, and so a lot of the community here was impacted. And so so today, I'm writing up a speech right now, just basically saying, once basically just provide them, an overall picture of what we do and how our work is truly important to their sustainability initiatives. So like I said, I'm typing up this speech right now. I'm on my lunch break right now.
So Sebastian, do you know what? Thank you for doing this, by the way. I'm excited to hear. Shoot me a text or an email tomorrow or even tonight when you get out. Give us two kind of sensitive things here. First, in terms of what is it that you think you have? Has there already been something advertised about the ability to kind of take the mic for a minute or two? Is there anything kind of already advertised in the format that ensures that you'll be able to speak? And then the second one, which is kind of a longer question, is what are your sort of goals as you perceive them? What is it that you want to actually relay, and what do you hope that will lead to? So let's just take the kind of more process question first.
So I'm not entirely sure how the public comment process is working. I've clicked on their link, and it just seems like it's kind of like a sign up list as you get there.
Like a city council meeting almost.
Like a city council meeting. Yeah, definitely like a city council meeting. And so I'm assuming it's going to be like 90 seconds or less. But city Camarillo is tiny here, so like I don't know how many citizens here are actually concerned about climate. It's not a hot topic, at any council meetings. But to answer your second question, I think the biggest thing I really just want them to know, I think there's a lot of hesitation on people's investment in carbon credit. I'm pretty sure they want to see action being done now in the city, and so for them to purchase carbon credit, for them they can't see how this is actually benefiting them. And so I kind of want to get rid of this whole stigma behind carbon removal. And so I guess I just want to emphasize that their purchase of high quality durable carbon credit is actually like beneficial to the city itself. I'm not entirely too sure how our process works.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Your camera froze. One thing Chris has been emphasizing. Oh, he's back. I was just going to say, you don't want to use the word carbon credit with the challenge, because we won't be doing that.
Yeah, it's not a carbon credit. Yeah, we can get into that. We love these guys' thoughts. I have some very specific thoughts on sort of objectives given that tight window of time, and you have no idea if anybody on the stage or in the audience has heard about this before. So you might want to focus on more fundamentally introducing the idea of carbon removal and trying to see if you can get would the city be willing to learn more? And then also seeing who's in the audience and being able to say, if anybody else is interested in learning more about this, is already thinking about it, I'm here and I would love to connect with others. So you might want a bit more upstream in terms of just introducing the subject, but I'll elaborate on that. But let's hear Harold and Carol's thoughts on that first.
Sebastian, if you only have a few seconds and you're not sure where the baseline is for the audience, the baseline is probably not going to be as educated as you are on the subject. And Carl and I have both been using some slides that get to the point really quickly. You won't have to use the slides, but we could walk you through, either one of us, the narrative of, how clear it is that we got to do a lot of CDR, and it'll help. And then the follow-up is, okay, we got to do a lot of it. That means not only globally, but here with an action plan in our city, we have to do some also. And so there are ways to start learning about that locally. And that's kind of, by the time then you get through that, your 2 minutes will be used up. But at least you will have set the stage for maybe further exploration by the city on this topic.
Yeah, I think those are all good, Harold. And again, when time is short, I find myself saying things like, so the bad news is we've waited too long to solve climate with just emissions reductions. The IPCC and others are increasingly clear we have to remove gigatons per year of CO2 by mid-century. The good news is we have an emerging set of opportunities and solutions being developed right now, some of which are already deployed. And I am personally, meaning you, Sebastian, I'm personally involved in a number of efforts related to all this. And so you've kind of framed the problem, you've established, you're in the game. And so those are just a couple thoughts I had.
Okay. So I'm typing up the speech right now. I mean, I'm probably going to print it and, I'm just basically read it, script for script. What I can do is I can share it with, Chris or you guys, and you guys can provide some input. Just because, for the rest of the day, I'm pretty much busy at work, and so as soon as I'm done with work, I'm gonna go straight to the committee, to the public workshop. So, I can share with you guys, and you can provide insight, or just make some edits to it if you guys want, or I can just kind of just go and wing it in a way with with the topics that you mentioned already. I just tweak the speech up a bit.
I put my email in the chat, so feel free to send me anything you'd like some eyeballs on.
Okay.
I got 4 of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me do this, Sebastian. Hopefully, Carl and Harold, remember last week I was right in the middle of a soapbox, and then I lost power. So hopefully that won't happen to me right now. But one thing I would stress for you, again, I wouldn't even mention the challenge, which seems weird that we're on this challenge call. I would leave them wanting a little bit more by doing the fundamentals of why are we talking about carbon removal, and validating it with a couple of very clear reference points that people usually count on to say, is this real or not, right? And so I just jotted down a couple notes, and let me know what you sort of think. But I think this is more to get a hook in people, so that there's either another conversation you can have with the people that are sitting up on the stage, or you attract other people to you in the audience who are like, yes, I'd like to learn more, and what are you thinking about it? And then you start to get your sort of posse, right? So the notes that I put down were, you stand up and you say, it's admirable that we have a climate plan. And, I commend the city for doing that. Okay. But as we are seeing, a lot of the measures there are probably not enough. And that's why both at the local level and at the global level, carbon removal is becoming more significant. And then in as simple of a way possible, you define what that means is taking emissions that are already in the air, taking out of the air, and storing them somewhere, right? And the way I do the rat-tat-tat is you say, scientists have known about this for a long time. The IPCC, has been telling us this for the last 8 years at least. California knows about it. Our own scoping plan says that we need to do it. And there's a bill that's already made it way through the sessions right now that calls for it right here in California, right? And then you could say, to bring it down to level, and increasingly many cities are acting on carbon removal right now, from Boulder to Flagstaff, and even now to San Francisco, right? So you kind of back your way into the subject about why this is part of the sort of conversation. And then you can, again, none of this you don't have to do. I'm just offering my sort of thoughts, and I can show you these bullets. And you can say, and there's many different ways to take carbon removal out of the air, from tree planting all the way to purpose-built machines, just to give people a sense of the perspective. And many of these deliver other benefits in addition to carbon removal that we care about here locally, from reducing the risk of forest fire to diverting waste, et cetera. And so then you could say, what I would love to be able to do is to be able to connect you to the universe of people right here in California that are working on this and to have a follow-up conversation, and anybody else who's here who wants to learn more about this or is already interested in this. I think it's important for us to know each other. Boom. That's the way I would kind of think about it in a way. If that makes sense, because I think getting into the whole, here's this purchasing challenge, this is what it means to buy. You're not going to have enough time for it, but it's also, you wouldn't have kind of laid the ground at least for why this even matters in the conversation. That would be my inclination, but maybe Carl and Harold disagree with us on that. And it's also an easier thing to describe, Sebastian, because it's higher level, to try to like fit in what a purchase is and stuff like that. And the 90-second thing is hard to do in any event. That can be another conversation, but you want to just get your hook in the people, right away and establish relevance. And then, hopefully you'll have your follow-ons from that. But curious what Carl and Harold think about that advice.
Okay. Alrighty. Well, I shared you guys the Google Doc for the speech. I have to get going. I have a meeting to prep for. But yeah, I'll keep you guys updated. Chris, I'll probably send you a text, just some follow-up or what came about, and hopefully to have good news next week. That's what we're hoping for. But anyways, I have to step off.
Thanks, Sebastian.
Guys.
Awesome
so
work,
much, guys.
Sebastian. All right.
Thank you.
See you. All right. Bye.
So just generally speaking, Adam, do you think I'm misguided in giving him that advice? Or
No. That was,
you think that's the right way to do
perfect. Yep.
Yeah.
Especially since you started with an acknowledgement of what they have already done. So that's cool.
Always the place to start is with appreciation.
There you go. And then to say, and, we're going to need more. And I'm here to offer some opportunities. I think that's a good build.
Okay, I'm going to just send those bullets to him just by WhatsApp, and I have an active chat going, and then I can kind of coach him on that a bit. But I think in general, for anybody who watches this recording, it's good to just always assume zero level of knowledge, and link it to what people think they're there for to talk about already, rather than sort of start with the cart before the horse. I think that's generally best practice. But Harold, curious if you have any other thoughts on that.
I have other thoughts, but not about that. About some of our earlier, both Carl and I ran into, well, we want to do something locally that feels like we're doing something locally. And in turning that around in my mind, I think we might be able to address that even before the question comes up, which is always good. If you can say that there are this evolving universe of companies that are doing this and making it possible to do things locally, but they're small. And because they need to scale, just like any industry needs to scale from when it's small to becoming available everywhere, our job right now is to help it scale so that you can, in the not too distant future, do something locally with it. And then some of the examples, like Avnet's producing water while it removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Now, who wouldn't want that, So there, and the wastewater treatment that Crew Carbon is doing, that's also just incredible. Everybody's got a waste treatment plant. Every city, well, at least every region. Like Carl says, Los Altos doesn't have one. Well, but you send it to Palo Alto. So everybody's got one of those, but they're, we can't start deploying them quite yet. And the reason we can't do it is because these little companies need to scale. And that's when you're starting to have the conversation about the challenges. This is one way is to think of it is you're doing it now to help them scale so you can do it locally later.
That's exactly one of the key, I think, let me see if I can remember them all, because sometimes I get them juggled over my head. But the way I think about answers to that question, one is very site specific, and that really works where you guys are. And the other ones are more general, is I think can you guys hear me? Let me turn my camera off. Okay, great. The first is to say that this is about making a purchase, but it's really an educational piece, right? It allows you to learn about these different companies and envision what's the kind of thing we think could happen here if people are really led by that impulse about local action, right? And to really make that clear to people. The other one is exactly what you just said, Harold, is that in order to have the prospect of in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years doing this kind of solution here, these little companies need to be not so little at that time. And this is a way of most supporting and making it even possible for us to make that option when the time comes. And then there's the third one that's specific to certain hotspots in the world, and you guys are in the mother of all of them, is to say this is an industry. Just like we identify with tech, and there was a history to that, those very same institutions are laying the groundwork and spinning off companies where this could be the future industry in California, and it's a significant one, and we want to be their supporters, and you can name those. So I think is a way of kind of localizing it. I think those are the kind of the three beats that you can take, and at least two of them are more universal in general, and then a third one is very specific, both to Northern and Southern California, because they have their own impressive set of companies down in Southern California.
The other thing that came to my mind, Chris, spinning off something else you said triggered me, is that to get the most people locally aware is something that, for instance, in having Stanford and the Doer School, I don't know how to pronounce it, but there's so much into CDR and climate restoration already. There's got to be some folks there who would sit on a panel discussion. Maybe it's hosted at Stanford, and a lot of those South Bay companies can come down, and I mean companies, but people in that region come down and find out about CDR, and some of the companies can be represented in a panel like that. Here's how it's vetted and sort of approved by DOE. We're going to have some of these people. We're going to have some academic validation, Doer School, et cetera.
Yep.
And, do things like that. No, most locales don't have Stanford, but they've got green towns, or they've got other groups that can help mount the presentation, as long as we have material and speakers who can show up.
Yeah, absolutely. It's
sponsored by the cities, sponsored by the council, the commission that advises the council.
Yep, I agree. And again, I think you're in a target-rich environment, in the Bay Area in general, for whether it's civil society groups like Menlo Spark or Greentown, or a university that has, or some combination of all of them, But, this is very fluid as we see these opportunities. And Carl, based on what you've said too, is like, well, we know Menlo has a lot of similarities and a lot of obviously connections to Los Altos, as it does with Palo Alto. But it would also be seeing like, is I presume Menlo Park is probably within this sort of sewage shed, as they sometimes call it, if it's also served by the Palo Alto one, there might be something to kind of really converge on, where you get kind of a group together with that maybe, you make a selection relatively early around something like a crew, or, there's a lot of ways we could kind of play it, but I think we should think expansively about what that could look like and just make calls on it. You know what I mean? Like, I think in a way we might be able to say, we're early in this. We're going to be able to, let's just make a decision about how we might, try to approach it. And if we did get Palo Alto involved, that's a bit of a game changer, not just because they have the wastewater treatment, because they have Stanford, and they have a lot of, expertise. So I don't know. That's just kind of what's going through my head right now, based on what you shared.
No, I like all that. And I dropped in the chat a link to essentially an event you guys just described, panel sessions on greenhouse gas removal at the Doer School, that occurred in April. And I was there all day for it, as was the city council, city employee from Menlo Park that I mentioned earlier.
He's
Brian,
great.
Yeah, so Brian Schmidt of Menlo Spark had been working with Ori, I forget his last name, on the city staff, and Brian convinced Ori to attend that event at Stanford. And I mean, dude had his laptop out, and he was taking notes, furiously the whole day. So that was pretty exciting. And so the good news in terms of your idea, Chris, is it's not a hypothetical. We can just send links like the link I just sent. Like this has already happened. And we had practitioners, for example, the CEO of Heirloom Carbon was there, Shashank Samala, et cetera. So yeah, no, I like that idea of kind of creating a community scoped partnership possibilities. Makes a ton of sense.
If we took this list that Chris mentioned earlier that we can find on the website, hopefully, of the jurisdictions whose climate action plans mention CDR, and we got connections or email addresses or something. We invite all of them to something that we put on sort of a national webinar, and try and broad brush it across all those groups.
That's a New York Climate Week thing we could do, Harold. We have enough time for that, and if we could potentially put something virtual on around like that. That'll be a busy week for me, but with enough planning, and I do webinars. It's my primary reality that I live in. You guys know, having never met me in person except for Carl. I don't think it's beyond the realm possibility to do that. I'll need a little bit of help, obviously, and maybe we could focus on talk about that a bit next week. It would also be interesting, Carl, though, I know people at Stanford, but do you know any of your kind of counterparts through CCT or through anything that are in Palo Alto that might be interested in connecting with us?
Yeah. So two names in particular. One, an old friend named David Cole, who's I think everybody on the Palo Alto City Council knows him by name by now. Oh, hey, David, what are you here today to talk about? Let me guess, cycling safety. So he's very active in local politics, and he and I have chatted about this kind of stuff. And then kind of at the other end of the age spectrum is a sophomore at this very prestigious private high school in Palo Alto called Castanea. I see Harold nodding. You're familiar with Casti. And this young woman, Tallulah, who actually attended one of these sessions a couple of weeks ago, Chris, she and I talked about carbon removal in addition to other things that CCL works on. So she's
in Palo Alto?
She's based in Palo Alto.
Yeah. Okay, there you go.
Yeah, so that's two different threads to tug on, maybe even connect the two of them. So I've got some of that in progress. But yeah, it's good to get the local folks that that are already active in these spheres or have interest in them engaged in stuff like this for sure.
Let's talk about that unless something else pops up. We'll obviously do news in the beginning of any kind of Harold, you're always kind of discovering, these different things that pop up. And if any news post the meetings that you guys, we'll obviously discuss those in the beginning. We'll hear from Sebastian in terms of how his session went. But maybe we can kind of split the meeting between these two things. Harold, the first one is let's do a little bit of a working call. I'll direct you to that document, but maybe we can kind of see, could we do an event, in 6 weeks' time during Climate Week that is more of a national thing where we really try to get, representatives from cities that we've identified have named carbon removal and do like a workshop on that. And then the other one is to explore this idea of a cluster that would be unique to Palo Alto, Menlo Park, Los Altos, but that kind of formation is also something kind of that Sue is sort of talking about, some species of that in New Jersey. And that's the kind of thing that might click in a lot of other areas. In fact, Sebastian originally was sort of thinking about that around Ventura County. Could you get multiple of the cities kind of doing it and maybe give that a little bit more shape so we could provide guidance on how something like that could look? I think that would be a really interesting thing to kind of, elaborate on a little bit more, like explore that. And again, if some other kind of great thing drops into our lap, we'll talk about that too. But, in terms of creating an agenda for next week, because I like the sound of both of those things.
Works for me. I will have more feedback from the people doing the International City County Managers Association.
Yeah.
Interview with Susie is going to be next week. So it'll be interesting to see how that progresses. I would talk about a group that has, it's like this list you're talking about of jurisdictions that have CDR in their climate action plan. Well, just reaching out to city managers with the same kind of idea. I mean, maybe we figure out how to get in front of that group, not just a blog post, but actually get in front of them. So that would be an objective to plan on.
Yeah, or even if you look at that, the cross listing of, are there any of those places on that list that are also, we would presume are in that, because there's a lot of counties on that list. It's not just cities. It's different, we could see, is there maybe that group that you're doing the blog, where it could be a way of advertising that workshop that we're talking about. We could also see, are there particular counties that are on that list in the report that we made that mentioned carbon removal, that could be really, really effective. And Susie would know, because I mean, Boulder is a county,
Right.
So she might be familiar with that group as well. But let's do that, because we'd have to make some quick calls in order to advertise it properly. We still have time. Climate Week is over a month away, but we'd want to commit to it and get a description of it and be able to start to share it with people, sooner rather than later.
I have kind of double mixed feelings about doing it during a Climate Week event, because then people tend to be super busy. And on the one hand, it's nice to be part of a larger thing, and that's good. It gets promoted in some ways. But on the other hand, everybody's super busy. You might not get as many actual.
You could be right about that too. But I think we did something in September would be good. So maybe we do it, right after that or something. But let's get down to the brass tacks of it next week. But I think it's a great idea, and let's explore that a little bit further next week.
Amen.
All right. Wish me luck, guys. Got a lot to do this week.
All right.
Thanks,
Go get him, Chris.
See you later.
Thanks, Carl.
See you later.
I'll
Bye.
introduce you, Carl, to Tammy. I look